We will begin to regather shortly, I believe. So in this third session, where I will be ready to receive questions, I think we have enough time to give questions quite their due. We don't have to come up with a snap answer. We may even return to them. So because of those who are watching off-site and taking part off-site, I have to repeat the questions. So who's going to kick off with a question that you want us to, a flow of reflection around, rather than a pat answer to?
Mark, one of the things that occurs to me, because I see myself doing it, but also I think is something that we women tend to do more than men, and that's to overdo our caregiving. You know, we're caregiving perhaps someone who's has some memory loss, but we're also very involved in all kinds of projects that women tend to do.
So this is a question that relates to women's tendencies and the risk for women of overdoing their caregiving life to the detriment of something else that's important. I suppose my first answer would be, yes, that's, in some sense there's a possibility, I think, for women for a kind of regression, which is if in the early phase of woman's life where there is the child rearing, it's a phase of life where you're going flat out and all out in caring for the family, there may be a brief period in life where you have a resumed kind of autonomy or more independence, especially when children have left college or something like that. There may be a sense that now is a time to attend to your own needs or claims. There's a tremendous risk of a re-triggering of a fundamental maternal sort of caring instinct that then goes into overdrive because of the really intense claims of someone who can do little for him or herself. And I suppose one simple answer would be, our capacities for rationalization are absolutely tremendous and amazingly resourceful. We have as human beings a tendency to make up stories to justify the sort of either the status quo or in some sense the most obvious path for us. And we can rapidly fight tooth and nail any pushback, because some dominant emotion or in need is governing the whole story now. And there's a tendency in the human person for a kind of either or narrative, which is, okay, this has destroyed my identity. This is, my autonomy is gone. There's nothing for it but abnegation, to kind of deny myself, give up any claims to have a separate life of my own. I'm in for a penny, in for a pound, I've just got to abandon myself to this, go entirely. Those two tendencies are very, very deep set ways the brain works, a kind of all or nothing, black or white approach, and also the kicking in of very, very primal emotions. And in some sense, the emotion to care for a dependent creature. We're dealing with not the upper level of the brain, the frontal cortex. We're dealing with very primitive, primal, if it's there, I need to wipe it or feed it, claims. It's something absolutely basic. And these things can happen in such a powerful undertow coming from below that if you challenge it, then another part of the brain will kick in to say, well, there's no alternative. There's no other way of doing it. I mean, I'm in for this now. Don't bug me with qualifications. So I think in all these things, this is an example of where shrewd human companionship is necessary, that we can't do the work of discernment on our own because our own rationalizing powers are too great. If we talk to ourselves in the mirror, it will be, okay, you have no life anymore. Just give, give, give. Only another person can keep on challenging that. And I think that might raise this issue then, which is, when you get into this situation, if you don't have a trusted party who will challenge you on this and get you to, and really push back at your rationalizations, you're sunk. I don't hold up a lot of hope for people who try to go it on their own, because we can make up stories to justify anything, especially those dominant narrative themes that we find easiest to say. And I mean, it's best just to keep on talking about fear. We have tremendous fear of the voice that says you're being selfish, you're being negligent, you're being indifferent, you're being greedy, something like that. And how many of us would have voices that really have a distinctive tone to them? It's your grandmother, or it's your mother, or it's a teacher that's implanted tapes that are scolding, and the accusation of selfishness is a very, very severe one for many of us. So we will assuage that voice. In fact, we'll cut it off before it can even start by going into overdrive of self-giving, just so that we protect ourselves even from that voice arising, which would throw us into a state of shame or something like that. And the spiritual direction is really intended, and therapy intended to be a context in which we face into our rationalizations and gradually unpick its claims on us. But people say, oh, sorry, the Sabbath's a commandment, not an option. What is your plan for rest? I mean, and spiritual directors are often people who are advocates for your heart's Bill of Rights. Someone was saying is that the more you serve other people in this overdrive capacity, the more likely it is you are brutalizing your own inner child by thwarting your need for rest, for respite, for affection, for playfulness. By not playing, you are doing violence to part of yourself. And in some sense, only a spiritual director can hold up a mirror that says, if you think you can protect yourself from guilt by over-serving, it won't work, because you will be abusing yourself. And we need some people to say, did you know that you're guilty of elder abuse? It just happens to be that you're the elder you're abusing. Just while you're dancing attendance on every whim and fancy of your spouse, you are bashing on your head your own self. So it's that self-negligent elder abuse. And in some sense, we can't come up with this on our own. We've got to have someone to spell out what we're doing. And some of the dynamics of shame, avoidance of guilt, the need to be in the right all the time. You know, I'm so mad at God, I'm so mad at life for dealing with this hand that I'll become a goddamn saint. You know, and that I'll mask the resentment behind my identity as the, oh, she's so wonderful. How she has the patience to do all this, and you know, she never takes a break and stuff like that. So, you know, but this pedestal that we're placing on ourselves as being above criticism arises from a very shadowy place in ourselves, which is to say, I cannot face criticism, I cannot face any doubt about myself coming from anybody, so I'm going to immunize myself against that by stuff like that. And so, and again in that conversation you might say, oh my God, I thought I was just being over-serving. But in fact I was being damn proud. Too proud to rest. Too attached to my image as above reproach. And so in some sense, the question you raise is like an example question, which says you pull the thread and you think it's, you know, suddenly a lot comes up, and you keep on pulling, and all sorts of stuff comes up when you pull this particular one, and find that there's a lot of painful self-knowledge is needed to come to terms with one's own needs. It's not. And you can read all the self-help books in the world about, oh, you know, write a list of things you need the rest and this and stuff like that, and get a little thing, and it's the 7 good practices of the perfect caregiver, you know, thing. And you know, oh, this is all giving me the answer. But it won't work when some of the stuff that's preventing us from a healthy reaction to the situation is really coming from some unhealed parts of ourselves. So it's quite, I mean, all this is very paradoxical, because God might be really saying to us, you know, you're under tremendous pressure now, but this pressure is going to open the seams in your own character. It's going to reveal some fault lines in your own personhood. So it's not just we're not into the business of coping or even giving sensible lifestyle ideas. It might be a now or never sense of, oh boy, time to look into some of these fundamental character traits or tendencies, because they will need now attending to if things aren't going to go really bad and you're going to drive yourself into the ground or whatever. Does that? And thank you for asking that question, which of course everyone will be living with as You know, at least giving us an example of how you drill into these things and it raises the deeper issues of healing. Good. And we haven't even gotten the list of things you're going to take a risk to ask.
So. Oh, this is in that second category.
Oh, good, right, good.
I'm very fortunate because my mother, who has dementia, is not living in the state, and there's a wonderful distance because we didn't have a very good relationship.
Yes.
And it's a blessing. However,
can I just repeat that? So this is a question about a mother with dementia living outside the state, but with a good distance in the circumstances, given that the questioner and her mother didn't get on all that well.
But as I have achieved some healing in that relationship, when I do see her, when I do talk to her by phone, I find it very difficult to deal with what I see as her anguish, her suffering.
Yes.
I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, so this is, although there's been some healing in the relationship, it's very difficult to deal with anguish and pain on the mother, on her part. Well, I mean, that's a question with, there are no possible easy answers to this. There are a number of things to observe, which is, often it is a time for changed relationship with a parent when it comes to dementia. The old situation may be really different now. But how do you stay with the anguish of another? Well, one of the things is, in a close relationship, there's still residual guilt after estrangement. It's not so easy to get away from. And the other is, staying close to any expression of anguish is of its very nature hard. We might have a voice saying, is there some easy solution to staying in close range with insoluble affliction or suffering? And the answer is, of course, it's always hard. We have a recoil mechanism inside ourselves from staying with. So, especially if we are driven by a kind of mythology of, I should be able to take someone's pain away. I should be able to alleviate or solve another person's pain. Now, let me just say that this question may simply raise with us a sense of the self-knowledge that we need is an awareness of what our habitual or instinctive reaction is to someone else's expression of intense emotion or insoluble pain or suffering. What feelings are being stirred up within us? And you may have your own work to do, but the fact that you've raised this question tells us what kind of work each of us would have to do. And it will often raise quite poignant issues of memory as to the role one played in life before, which is, I was supposed to be the little miracle worker that helped everybody and helped everybody feel better. There's some part of my own life which tells me I was positioned as a little boy in a family system as the one who was supposed to make everyone feel better. And, you know, I sort of ran around as the family diplomat. I was the only person who everyone spoke to me in a family much divided by divorce. And hundreds of people didn't speak to hundreds of people. But I spoke to everyone, so I was the little go-between. You know, my father had not spoken to my grandmother in 30 years. My father never spoke to my mother after their divorce ever again. And it went on and on and on with these ramifications. And I had this feeling of, well, I should pass everybody's message to each other. But each and every time, I must make the other person feel okay. So, I mean, my own reflection would be that somehow I'm in the business of making somebody else's pain go away just now. So I feel driven by an inner voice that says mine is to pacify, to assuage, to soothe, to charm, to deflect, to distract. I mean, this is quite a serious business of self-knowledge. If you come to terms with, recognize your own drivenness, and you might, in some sense, have to go through a kind of work which drops roles that are second nature to you. And I think the work that is done in therapy is often actually you are not responsible for assuaging or soothing or pacifying or distracting. None of those roles might actually belong to you, and the notion that you can actually alleviate someone's pain at its root may be completely false. There may be an insoluble source of pain, especially in dementia, which you cannot possibly take away. So you might in some sense have to keep on answering questions again and again, is to say, but what can I do? And even that question might have to be reframed. We keep on asking each other, what can I do for you? What can you do for me? And there've been no answers to that are real. But if you start asking the question, who can I be for you? And who can you be for me? Might enable us to be in a much better place. You can't do anything for another's pain, but you might be able to be someone for it, which is to hear it or to stay in range of it without flinching, to carry it to a certain extent by saying, by allowing your own peace of mind to be disturbed by it as a kind of burden bearing, a willingness for a resonance to take place with someone else's pain, allowing it to resonate with you without it destroying you or overwhelming you, and without you being deceived into thinking you can make it go away, allowing it to strike a chord within you. And some of this is to do with honoring one's own vulnerability to pain, so that another person's pain and frustration is accepted by you because you recognize your own vulnerability to it as well. She's exasperated, she's frustrated, she's banging her head against a wall, basically. Well, that's not so foreign to what I would do and what I sometimes do in my own way. Let me find a place. So now we're moving into that theme of compassion which crosses all boundaries of the great religions and ties us in, that we know that the fundamental wisdom is in some sense an emotionally honest resonance with other people's vulnerability and pain. So this is the kind of language you might use in a conversation about this. And I think as you gather together in a community of people who are in conversation about the strains, the stresses, the opportunities of being in relationship with those with memory loss, this is just the kind of conversation we should be having. What feelings are stirred in me? Where do those feelings come from? Where are my reactions being governed? What kind of detachment might let me let them go? Can we create a space in which we can reframe, who can I be? And I think if we ask the question, who can I be for another? I'm sure that always is tied to a similar ability to connect with God in a different way. Because, people always seem to have taught us that prayer was about asking for something from God. You know what I mean? Ask God for this, ask God for that. And there comes a point in life when that might change, where we're saying, Jesus, I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to be this for me. And they're different. I think prayer might be best stimulated by thinking, who does Christ want to be for me just now? So I think that kind of language is often opening up a different angle. Does this ring a bell? I think this I can see some heads nodding. That might lead us in a new direction of thought. I find poetry enormously helpful. And my spirituality is very much carried along by small memorized snippets of poetry, which I find more helpful than a lot of other things. And I find my ability to sit with other people's pain helped by me able to recite some of these verses of poetry that sort of recenter me. I'll give you an example. There's a little poem that Rilke wrote in someone's guest book. The final thing is not self-subjugation, but silent loving from such centeredness we feel round even rage and desolation the finally enfolding tenderness. The final thing is not self-subjugation, but silent loving from such centeredness we feel round even rage and desolation the finally enfolding tenderness. So if you put the phone down after a conversation with your mother where she's been sort of raging away and, you put the phone down and you could be so jangled, but that poem might say, I've heard her rage and I've stayed with her desolation. I didn't deflect her. I didn't change the subject. I just said, I hear you. And then after it, I feel round even rage and desolation the finally enfolding tenderness. The idea that there is a presence that's holding this ball of rage that I've been willingness to stay close to. But there's a tenderness that's enfolding it all. And I know the solution is not for me to do stuff to myself. The final thing is not self-subjugation. Don't try and fix yourself or kind of make it all right with yourself by mental tricks. Don't do any of that. Just silent loving. Does that help? I mean, that gives you an illustration of the fact that there are some things we need sometimes that just very like the mantras, these little guideposts that re-center us on what matters and what feels most real for us. That's what I would say, probably in relation to that. Part of the rhythms of living lives of service where we're spending ourselves a lot is we've got to have some sort of rhythms of letting go. Otherwise, stress will have a cumulative effect. Let's say we allow the burdens of other people's emotions and needs build up till we become emotionally congested with frustration over the sufferings of others. So all the great spiritualities of the world are encouraging some actual practice that yields it up or hands it over to God, so that you're not getting a cumulative burden, but there's some kind of process of surrender, letting go. A lot of these methods would have to be quite physical, so almost yoga-like for a lot of us, because we carry emotion in our bodies. So it'd be a case of, what do I do physically, regularly, which has the effect of discharging accumulated stress that is bound to arise from very consistent caregiving to another. In other words, it's perfectly normal to feel after a day or two resentful again or stressed out again. This is normal. But what do we do to discharge it? To let it go? It's like an electric current that we need to ground periodically. Some people are going to need stretching and breathing exercises. Some people are going to use poetry. Some people are going to use meditation. We're going to use prayer in a more conversational way. Others are going to use the way our contact with nature or animals has that discharging effect of recentering and regrounding as a letting go. Or a bit of everything. Would you say that you'd, who in this room has got a sense of what rituals they know they need to use for that to happen? Few hands going up. People you have to learn for yourself what works. People are going to say, only music will do it, so I'm going to have to set aside half an hour on the piano or listening to this piece of music. Or some people are going to say it's only by playing with the dog for half an hour. Some people are going to say the hot tub, and others are going to say meditation, some are going to say yoga, and others are going to, like me, to know that these poems will have the effect. I will say to myself, there's a haiku, yield to the willow all the desire and loathing of your heart. This is a very short haiku, which is meaningless to most people, but for me, it builds up the image of the weeping willow with those downward hanging branches, and it's just a sort of almost literally letting it hang out, letting the willow tree with its branches bending down, just a sense of let those emotions of fear and loathing, desire, grasping, it's just a kind of trigger for me, a signal that I'm not supposed to be carrying all this, and that I'm entitled to breathe. As a child, I didn't breathe very much because in an alcoholic household, it's too dangerous to breathe. You've got to keep all your attention for the eggshells you're walking on. And so, for me, breath is very hard. Breathing is a very unnatural thing for me. I find, so deep breathing is a big deal for me to counteract deeply learnt tendencies towards stress addiction. There are some of us for whom, lives of service are very dangerous because we might have had a childhood that has made us stress addicted, which is a real physical feeling, which is, I am stressed, therefore I am. That is to say, it's a real feeling that one is only entitled to live if one's carrying this amount of burden. It's almost like a thermostatic control, so that people like us who go on holiday, once we're in the deck chair, our hair stands on end, and our flesh creeps with it all. Like, well, I'm not doing something, like I should be fixing something or helping someone. I'm getting the shakes, and it's only day 2 of the vacations and things. And I think stress addiction is a very real thing, and someone who goes into that long-term caregiving mode could easily end in that situation, which is I sort of govern my life by the thermostat of just how keyed up I am about my responsibilities. And therefore I can't, if I try to let go, the red light will go on the panel, and it'll exactly, something's wrong here with this situation. You shouldn't be here in the spa, or you shouldn't be taking time to watch those butterflies, given your to-do list. I can hear him getting confused in the back, that kind of thing. Good. Another question, so.
Well, I don't know if there is an answer to this question, but...
She doesn't know there's an answer to this question.
My name is Elizabeth.
Yes.
I'm chaplain at the long-term care.
Yes. Chaplain at a long-term care facility?
Care
yes.
As well. And my question, sometimes I find myself frustrated with the lack of ability of families to let go, to follow the doctor's advice or the nurse's care advice when they're asking for the loved one to be put on comfort care or palliative care. I have so many families who, especially if they're younger daughters, daughters especially, I don't know if it's a pattern. Daughters especially do not want to let go of parents. And it's almost as if they can't see what's going on.
Yes. So there's a question from an experienced chaplain about her observations of the numbers of families, especially younger women, who really can't let a loved one go into the care situation.
Every kind of interference done
Yes.
by a doctor, whether it's feeding tubes or
Yes.
shots or whatever,
Yes.
and it's obvious to anyone that the poor man or woman, the father or the mom, who is in memory loss, severe memory loss, has no quality of life.
Yes. So by letting go in this question, you're meaning surrendering extraordinary means to keep a person alive.
Yes, keeping them comfortable with hospice care,
Yes.
local hospice
Yes.
organizations.
Yes, no, that, yeah.
I'm just wondering if anyone can help me with that. I never lost a parent to any kind of memory care loss. I lost them to, I don't know, well, my father just followed another skirt down the road one day, and my mom died of alcoholism. But when I watch these, I can feel for these people, but I don't know why they can't see total lack of quality.
So the issue you're particularly concerned with is when it reaches a certain critical point where extraordinary means are not really called for or recommended, but families are trying to insist on them. Yes. Well, there's no easy answer to that, because I think we have to come to terms with irrationality. It's a very, very comprehensive way when you're dealing with the field of emotions surrounding the loss of reason. it's very easy for us, isn't it, for us who are working from a rational standpoint, which medical care does, and we need that reason, to cope with the dominant feelings that are overruling sheer rationality. This is really an issue about coming to terms with human nature in a way. I don't know, I'm sure the medical profession has some, and psychological profession has some techniques in some sense of leading people through the process where at first they're making in this very demanding way. But from our point of view, the starting point would be a compassion for the issue of letting go, and the fact that we live in a culture where the technology of medicine has changed human consciousness about death. In some sense, people in our culture are saying, well, there's a technical means of fixing this, so we don't face death, loss, and pain. And I think part of the frustration that you might be feeling is the deep ambivalence that we're bound to have as caring persons in the contemporary, highly technologized world of care. Because on the one hand, it's made a vast difference to life. But there's a kind of downside in the degree to which human beings have been seduced into thinking that there is a technical means of avoiding suffering, loss, and averting death. And I think if I was in your situation, part of my frustration would be living with this ambivalence. I'm glad there's all these things around to relieve human suffering, but the downside is that we've tricked ourselves or been seduced into thinking that technology answers everything, and that the rational mechanisms of science should fix it all. And I think, in some sense, anyone working with death in North America, whether in hospice or whether they're priests or whether they're medics, know that our whole approach to death is profoundly skewed and distorted.
Oh, the word by the staff. I have to get them to say the word.
Yes, exactly.
It's past.
Yes, exactly.
Lost.
Yes, exactly.
The
denial is part of both the denial of death, which has been a feature of American culture for quite a long time, and the advanced technology surrounding the closing stages of life in our wealthy and highly technical state.
Certainly lost, but yes, I lost my mother.
Yeah.
And because I never really had it, you know what I mean? So I lost that opportunity. So I can understand the words, but people are afraid to say that.
Yes. So these frustrations are inevitable, and one has to kind of come to terms with, if you say to yourself, I'm on a one-person crusade against an entire cultural bias, you're going to fry your circuits. No. So in some sense, you sort of acknowledge that the best you can do is to be as honest as you can be without being ideological, and in some sense to gently say death so that you get known to be the person that isn't afraid to say death, rather than the person who's on a crusade to smack people who say pass away. Do you know what I mean? It's almost a sense of just doing what is natural for us and gently pushing back against the culture, so that we don't collude with it, and that we are kind of, I don't know, agents of agents of truth-telling without going on a crusade or a soapbox. And I think it, and for persons with genuine spirituality to be really in the hospice world is a good thing, because it started off in the inspiration of Christian spirituality. I was a volunteer for the first hospice in the world. When the paint had not dried on the windowsills, as we said, I was amongst the first group recruited as volunteers for St. Christopher's Hospice in Sydenham. And it was a wonder to see these pioneers at work, because anything less technological, apart from their shrewd brilliance at pain relief, could hardly be imagined. Cicely Saunders and her colleagues said, you turned up in this very business-like way and said, well, Mr. Jones over there, I remember my first day on the ward, this is my training. Mr. Jones over there doesn't have any relatives and he's dying. Would you go and hold his hand until he has? And you just part the curtains and there'd be this little old man puffing and panting, looking at you like a sort of frightened dog, until you moved in and you held his hand, and that was it. Get with it. Get with something very basic, very human, which is to keeping someone company and making sure they weren't alone. And there was a tremendous sort of healthiness about this plain normalizing of death. It was not denial. It was very blunt. It was very open. But it didn't. We were being told that not to be intimidated or to push back at it, but to lean in it and be with it. And what was needed was not weeks and weeks of training, but some spontaneous access to our own humanity. It was very, very, you can tell I'm quite moved just remembering that winter vacation that I spent at St. Christopher's that time.
We actually have a few elders from the upstairs who are nursing home level people who have been trained a little bit, not a lot trained, but they will come and sit with people.
Good. She was saying there was those on the upper level have been trained to do some of that accompaniment work. Anyway, thank you for that question. I think it opens up all sorts. Again, all these questions open up as many questions as we answer.
I think that question too speaks to the need for all of us to make our wishes known, so that if we were to be in that situation, families would know exactly what we want.
Yes.
And if I was to
Yes. Here's a reminder to make our own arrangements well in advance.
Part of it is the sort of medical industrial complex, too. I mean, doctors are required to intervene until they're asked
Yes.
by families not to intervene. I remember when my father was dying of cancer, I ended up in the hospital and he had an IV in his arm. He had pneumonia scare, and I thought we'd all agreed that it was just palliative. And his doctor's on vacation. I talked to the doctor, and he said, we need to get rid of this penicillin. We're not treating this, and any fluids or anything. And he said, well, that's the right decision. I just couldn't make that decision.
Yes.
So in some ways, the medical complex we're meshed in is of a certain generation, people believe their doctors without. My mother was a World War II Army nurse. She was able to speak up and say no.
Right.
I need to be the other daughter who was actually.
Yes, Heidi is giving a very good reminder of just how the medical complex is geared towards intervention and how difficult it is, in some sense, to unplug those mechanisms in the name of our own freedom of choice and the choice of that some of a particular generation found difficult to make because of being rather overawed by the hierarchy, the medical hierarchy. That's really an important reminder. And in some sense, I think the world of spirituality, religious communities, perhaps we're at this stage saying, in this sphere, as in so many, we have a countercultural role to play. That in some senses the religious communities that are guardians of reverence for death itself, that death is not the failure of the medical system. The death is not something's gone wrong, as it were, with our magic powers. Death is what it is. And we, in some sense, we have to be respectful of and surround with reverence a process which has its own meaning and its own, that has to be honored through ritual and through clarity, that we don't muddy it all up with the pretense of 1,001 things to hold it at bay, to the very end. We can respect its onset. We can prepare for it. We can surround it with prayer. We can allow death to have to be, in some sense, honored. I mean, when St. Francis in the Canticle of the Sun reverences sistered bodily death, I mean, it is a remarkable expression of spirituality. Just to say, death itself is honored as a kind of visitant when she comes. It's like and is in fact the means by which we are tipped into the lap of God, sort of thing. And you don't hear much about sister death in the critical care units in hospitals, where behind these banks of machines, in some sense.
Philip Pullman, the great.
Yes, what?
Philip Pullman, the great.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a good thing.
And I would just like to add that in terms of honoring death, we need to honor that by making sure we leave clear, concise instructions, and the people who are to carry those instructions out are aware of them.
Yes, Celia's reminding us of the human and spiritual importance of leaving our instructions and our wishes surrounding death, and making sure people are aware of them and know their responsibilities.
So it also offers us an opportunity to talk with our families and with our spouses about what we really want.
Yes.
I've just been through this with my husband, who is 17 years older than me. So we live on a slightly different plane, or I live on a slightly different plane. I always tell him he's healthier than I am, which is true. But those are the hard places. Those are the thin places to address. That's the intimacy that one doesn't want to necessarily walk into.
Good. So Celia's giving us a good reminder of that, the importance of leaning into that intimate kind of conversation that opens up the issue of how we want ourselves to be treated at death and what follows.
And the difficulty in our society is all these euphemisms that we use to surround ourselves with.
Yes.
And with the lawyers, I think one has to be prepared to put the reality on the table.
Yes. So yes, putting the reality on the table. Again, this is another avenue in which we've approached that. Approaching death with spiritual integrity, honesty, is a countercultural phenomenon. We are surrounded by a mass of culturally reinforced denial mechanisms and palliations and euphemisms, and our emotional honesty, our spiritual honesty about death is, well, it's a very significant contribution to being sort of like prophetic, pushing back against some of these cultural norms. I find in the responsibility of preaching at funerals is a really important opportunity for this, because funerals themselves are being very, very distorted now in American culture towards being retrospective memorial services where, you know, family members pop up and tell 20 minutes of funny stories and endearing, reminiscences about the deceased. But some of the most ancient themes that funerals have had from time immemorial about commending the deceased into the hands of God, speaking about forgiveness and reconciliation and all those things, these are being censored out or erased. And the honesty with which a sermon at a funeral can, without aggression, gently bring to the surface those very themes that the culture is finding it difficult to handle, just so that they can be woven into something more whole and more honest, and something more rooted in human experience of what we need to deal with at death. So, and that's another area we've become very conscious of. So, other questions that might even come from the second page.
This is not a question, but to expand on this theme of the living will, or whatever you call the directives for your family. Hopefully, we're all educated to do that. But given the statistics that you started with today, it seems to me that we should also be having intimate conversations with whoever is near us about memory loss and about what kind of care, what I think sometimes the spouse expects to do more than they should, and I would rather relieve my spouse of that need now and say, I would rather have a professional do those embarrassing things than you. I mean, it gives me a chance at this age to preserve some little dignity later.
Yes, here's a very interesting contribution then about how we can have conversations now about the kind of care we expect of our spouses in age to come, and could even change the operation of their consciences in advance by saying, actually, I'm really prefer to be in care, or something like that. I think these are interesting new conversations. We've got to be ready for conversations that have never been had before like this, because we must keep on reminding ourselves how very recently it was that life expectancy was so much shorter. With it just 2 generations ago, when they say when Social Security started, people were expected to draw pensions for 5.3 years. So that when people retired at 65, the very statistics which were used to calculate pensions assumed that most would be dead around 71, and that indeed it was, as you can remember from our grandparents' generations. And then suddenly we're both dealing with decades, and we're dealing with medical systems and possibilities of residential care, again, that were not within the purview of our predecessors. So there are conversations about imagining or wrapping our minds around these future situations of prolonged care needs. So we would be inventing these kind of conversations. We'd be saying we as spouses might be having the kind of conversation that very few have ever had before. We're sort of pushing into a different area. But it's a very good thing to practice, because I think this in many other ways is a way of, and I think you ought to honor yourself in this way, of saying, God above all things is the inspirer of pioneers. God likes to be the stimulant of people having unprecedented challenges and conversations. So that God is our companion, say, go ahead, practice conversations like this. See what it feels like to say to a spouse, you know, if push came to shove, I'd rather you came to me in a good nursing home several times a week than you killing yourself looking after me 24/7. I mean, really? And so, and then you'd really, you'd have to say, well, let me think about that. Let's come back to this next week and sort of take up that conversation again so I can understand what we're really getting at and what I would feel about that.
And perhaps with your children,
yeah,
back to what she was saying.
Exactly.
Give them that.
Mm. Yeah. And there's you mentioned the word children. I'm just sort of free associating here because in some sense this is a conversation that's not really intended for those of us in the second half of life. I mean, because if this is what it's like when the wood is green, what will it be like when it's dry? I mean, our children and grandchildren are facing a demographic situation in which what we are going through is as nothing compared with what's coming down the pike. I mean, again, I tell you about, you should look up this BBC program about the demographics of Chinese society, where they said, you know, in the year 50, there will be 450 million old age pensioners, but no pension scheme. And they've only had one child under the one-child policy. So there will be not even a fraction of people available to do the family caregiving that Chinese tradition allocated to children. Neither is there any, exactly. But it'd be very interesting for a discussion which talked about child rearing and about the raising of children towards a mentality of the family life which really took into its consciousness the fact that older parents and grandparents are going to be alive much longer. What kind of values do you want to inculcate in young people for them to keep community with the old? Because it is a scandalous, a shocking and deeply painful social phenomenon of the number of old people from whose children are negligent or estranged. That one of the chief narratives of American stories is, I don't get on with my parents, sort of thing. America has the luxury of people cutting their parents off emotionally, and there is a lot of melodrama in American relationship between parents and children, which means there's quite a lot of estrangement and alienation. But also, whatever society there is, just it is shocking to me to think of the infrequency with which children visit or contact the vulnerable elderly. I remember I was in a conversation recently in which I let slip that I Skype my mother in New Zealand every day. She's 92. And I phoned my stepmother, who's 93, every day. They say, every day? Are you crazy? It's like, what's with all this? Well, I said, well, it doesn't cost anything. It's Skype. And I just want to know at the end of the day whether they're okay. We just gossip about, anything come by the mail. What did you have for supper? And what's the weather like? And are your shoulders much the same as before? Kind of thing. And my knees are playing up. I don't know about you, it's the weather. I mean, it's just. But given the fact that through technology, phone calls don't cost anything anymore to speak of, you think, oh my God, what depths of estrangement and hostility and abandonment and negligence are quite normalized for so many people who, there are vast swathes of our society where people who said at work that they only call their parents on Thanksgiving, Christmas and their birthday will be regarded as perfectly normal. And you think, oh my God, has it come to that? So what kind of values or what kind of community have we created, whereas there's so much atomization of community, that there is so much loneliness, precisely at the time when communication, at least by phone and Skype, is instantaneous, free. So I mean, I don't know what the answer to is, but I know that there's something very poignant and troubling about the foundations, the lack of foundations now for creating a society where the lines of connection and community will be sustained to hold a very much larger and vulnerable older population together with everyone else. I have some sense that the church might regain confidence in itself more when it recognizes that it is in fact the last bastion of multi-generational life. In my own church is a very rare and wonderful demographic. It's one of the few churches I've ever been in where every generation is fully represented. That's to say, it is a thoroughly multi-generational church with big blocks of every age group, no missing age groups at all, oceans of children, bags of people of every phase of life. And you think, well, my God, this is, you ask more and more, where are the places where young and old are genuinely held together in community? And you think, well, that's with all sorts of interest clubs are all, disappearing anyway, but they're also very small or niche clubs and things. But the church holds together an ideal of a multi-generational community, and I think it's a very powerful and beautiful ideal, and one that we should more consciously celebrate, which raises whole issues of how we might in the future reconnect the vulnerable and isolated older people, especially those with memory loss, and reconnect them through normal human contact with children and younger people and animals. So that there is something worrying about how a care facility can become basically ghettoized, generationally ghettoized, so that the contact with babies and children and animals becomes too far and few between, when those very contacts would be the most loving and tender things you could possibly do for someone with memory loss. In some sense, the most wonderful thing to do would be if people with memory loss were allowed to have the touch and be surrounded by children, and to be able to stroke and fondle animals, and to be able to have those elemental and simple forms of play. And a visit from someone with a therapy dog once a month might not be quite enough. So I mean, one could have a sort of visions that they might seem very idealistic now, but none the worse for that, which you could say that the pattern we see now of some, really good care facilities, we hope, but that's not the end of the story. Maybe further on we might rewrite the story of how older people are cared for and honored precisely by bringing them into play with other generations.
I have a lab, and a yellow lab.
Yes.
An English lab.
Yes.
And I caretake for a couple.
Yes.
Who both have dementia.
Yes.
And the husband is quite into the illness, but I take him to my house and we pick up the dog and then we go for a drive. And the dog knows about this man on some level, which is interesting to me. And he remembers the dog. That's all he ever remembers. But he always remembers Sophie and can name her.
That's a very interesting testimony from someone who gives care to an older couple about the seeming knowledge that the yellow lab has of the very person of the gentleman with dementia, and how he remembers the dog, Sophie. That's a touching example of the fact that there are. I suppose the hopeful note will be to say is, things are in early days with this care. As I said, there are many ways of enhancing the quality of life of people with severe memory loss that we've not yet fully deployed. And with the deployment of more of them, the quality of life may really go up for everyone.
Well, I'm teaching them to be Buddhists in their thinking, where they live only in the present. And they get a big laugh out of that.
Yes.
So it's a question, I think, a lot of times of using my imagination of what might work.
Yes. I'm sure the Buddha would appreciate the humor of teaching those with memory loss to live in the moment, because actually that's all they have. And I think in this kind of sense, this sense of humor, it's actually a big tool for us in this mode, is to say, well, it is actually all we have in a strange kind of way. So can we go with that? Can we deal with that? Can we build on what's possible with a sense that it could be sort of valued with humor in some sense? And I was just sharing with someone at the table a very, very interesting BBC program about the use of storytelling now with Alzheimer's patients. I heard it. I'm somewhat of an insomniac, unfortunately. I wake up usually about 4 o'clock, so I listen to a lot of BBC programs. And it was really saying that, then it came onto NPR as well. It was NPR, it came to NPR as well. And it's basically that showing pictures and inviting those with memory loss to make up stories about what they see requires no pressure of memorization that they can't recall. This doesn't expect them to recall. It says, like, what's your story about what you see in the picture? And remarkable results of the sense of relaxation or freedom that everyone has, that those with memory loss can make up most amusing and intriguing stories. And just in the conversation that emerges from the storytelling, with the dignity of writing it down, recording the story, you're really awarding someone the chance to use a part of their mind that is in fact able to function without being stymied or blocked by memory loss. And that a family that learns how to do this or to take part in this can come away feeling we've had a kind of conversation. Not a conversation that we couldn't have because the person didn't remember, but a kind of conversation we could have because they could project and imagine stories about what they saw in the picture. And that seems to me to be, an example of a promising tool of learning to be more adept at inviting those who are articulate to find some place where they can be articulate without stress. I thought it was a wonderful story. It was very intriguing and scientifically backed by excellent results. Right. Yeah, do that.
I was at a meeting the other day and I brought it up to a group of
Yes.
And they thought it was the most exciting thing they'd heard of in years.
Yes, I think it was very...
It's tremendous. So people are often ignorant.
Yes, I thought that was a very...
You can be trained, you don't have to.
It sounds like a new building block in a sort of a larger approach.
Patricia, who was here, is doing music.
Yes, another great...
Anything else?
I
don't want to.
You know, as we stay at the end of a workshop place, we've only scratched the surface, but it was a good old scratch. And I would just like to say, really, thank you for providing the setting for this conversation. As someone said about this novelist Stendhal, he always used to say when he came back from a party, he said that I had a wonderful time. I learned so much from what I found myself saying. And in some sense, I haven't a clue about some of these issues. But if someone says, start talking about it, even I will find something that, okay, we have a body of experience, and if we create opportunities to pool that experience, our imaginations can be stimulated and we can end up more sort of hopeful and realistic. So thank you for giving the incentive for thinking aloud. It's been a pleasure.
I think it was 2 years ago that we asked, or Marianne asked, if you would come back and tackle this.
I said yes.
And you were very intrigued. That's wonderful. Oh God, as we go forth from here, bless us with humor that lightens our path and brings us new insights. Bless us with companionship, those who travel with us to help us carry our hearts, whether we are caregiving or receiving care or both. Bless us with those tender surprises, those grace moments that here and there touch each of us unexpectedly in our lives. Bless us with compassion as we open our hearts to each other, and may we know so deep and down that we are held in your heart always. Amen.
Amen.